No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
Pike on money, pike on money, pike on money. We making pike on money. Payday, about to throw a rack on China. Need some DFS advice, where can I find some? League of Items got the sheet with all the lineups and all the stats that you need to get to diamond. League of Items!
Getting gold, that's the goal. Keep on winning on a roll. Kill 4 dragons, got soul. Now you got nowhere to go. Teleporting top to bot. Dive your carry on the spot. That's an ace. Wreck your base. Wear my crown. We on top.
It's the league, it's the league, it's the league, it's the league, it's the league of items.
League of Items!
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Legend, legend, legend,
legend,
legend, legend.
legend.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we are going to take a victory lap. Congrats to DRX for winning Worlds 2022. Great performance, some of the best matches that most of us have ever seen. This was probably the most entertaining Worlds and one of the most competitive World Championships that League of Legends has ever had. And I think that it's due in large part to the meta and the versatility within the meta, and how the stylistic differences between teams could kind of be shown during games, and it wasn't just like you need to pick this, and this champion, otherwise you have no shot. I do think that there were some champions that were, super impactful, and the reason why a lot of the drafts started looking the same is because once you get to a certain talent level, the decisions that you can make against certain teams is just much lower. And then ultimately, T1 against DRX, stylistically, they're very similar. They have slight differences in terms of talent and some champion pool stuff, but for the most part, they can almost all play all of the champions. So in this video, I wanted to take a look at a couple of things. So like I said in my previous video that a lot of you saw, well, probably all of you saw, and a lot of you commented on it, and a lot of people were like yelling at me in the comment section, saying like wild stuff to me. There were some people defending me, which was funny, but I don't really need people to defend me, but I appreciate it when people do. But I want to kind of take this opportunity to, help explain why I thought this was possible, and, maybe give some additional credence to the way that I look at things, because I've been talking about DRX since last winter, before the season even started. I was really high on EG going into the year. I was also high on Vitality, which didn't work out, and Weibo Gaming, which didn't work out. But the process isn't supposed to get us into a spot where every single team that we pick has a good season. It's picking the types of teams that have upside because of the talent on their team, and then you do need a couple of good things to go your way. Like the fact that DRX went to the 5th game in a bunch of different matches, the fact that they even made it to Worlds, like all of these things are very close to not happening and can, turn into a lost bet. But the goal isn't to win every single bet. That's just an unrealistic goal. The real goal is to win, between 57 to 60, like really 55 to 65% of the time. And you want to make some bets that have big upside. And like if you want to look at how I organized the teams that I was betting on before Worlds started, I had money on Damwon Gaming, DRX, Rogue, G2, C9, Fnatic, and EG. You could say, well, Pikel, you had money on so many of these teams. It's really not impressive, because if one of those teams you're gonna say like, you picked something incredible. The thing is most people were not giving DRX even a realistic chance of winning. People weren't giving Damwon Gaming a realistic chance of winning. And that's kind of where there's an opportunity to make money. At the end of the day, you want to make money, right? So, that's kind of why we bet on these things. But at 2,500, it was wild to get those teams at 2,500 when it was clear by the time that we got to the knockout stage that they were two of the best teams in the world. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to play the clip from January where I talked about DRX. The LCK. And we're talking about DRX. People who've been watching my videos so far this year are probably sick of hearing about DRX, but I'm very hopeful that they're going to have a ridiculously good season, and I would consider betting on them at plus 4,000. So that means that if you bet $100, you get 4,000 back, or 4,100 back, and the updated odds actually have them at 4,500, so the odds are moving in the opposite direction. The only concern that I would have for this team is the AD carry spot, because if Deft isn't at the same level that he used to be, and I'm not going to be right about everything, but again, it's not about getting everything right, it's about getting enough right to be able to make good decisions in the future, which I'm not saying that he is or isn't. Then they're going to bring in Taeyun. Taeyun last year had some good performances. DRX struggled overall after an okay spring split. I think they had a really bad summer split, if I remember correctly. But Taeyun, after subbing in, had some good performances, so maybe that would actually turn into an upgrade if he's a more aggressive player, something along those lines. Kingen was on the roster last year. Piosik was on the roster last year. And also when DRX was basically a super team with Chovy and Deft the year before, they had a very, very, very good team, DRX. And that's one of the most important takeaways that you should probably have from this video, is that it's not just about, what did the team do for me lately? It's about how much history do these players have? How much history do these teams have? And were these players ever, borderline elite talents? And it was pretty insane that DRX let all those players just leave. I think they had Keria at that point too. Yeah, so it was Doran, Piosik, Chovy, Deft, Keria. Like, what an insane roster. In 2020 when they went to Worlds and they lost at Worlds, when I was thinking about their future potential, I really did think that they would go into 2021 as one of the favorites to win the World Championship, and I would have bet on them to do that. But the entire roster just fell apart. So it's pretty wild that something like that can happen. But now we have Zika. I don't think that Zika is on the level of Chovy, but Zika is a very highly thought of player in Korea. He went from the LCK to the LPL when Koma was the coach of Vici Gaming. Koma is a good talent evaluator, and notice how I knew that storyline 9 months ago when some of the casters at Worlds didn't, and they brought it up as like a surprise. Like they said, I forget who it was, but somebody said, "Oh yeah, Dagda mentioned that Zico was on Vici Gaming with Koma," and that was news to them, which is kind of surprising. So you need to realize that just because these people get paid to cast games and be analysts and stuff, it doesn't mean that they're watching all the regions and picking up these kinds of storylines, which ultimately do provide some value for sports betting. And if Koma thinks that Zika is good enough to be on his professional League of Legends team, then I want to support Zika. And he had some good performances in the LPL, especially in 2020. In 2021, he was on BLG, and BLG's coaching staff was horrible. There would be a lot of drafts where Zika was just put on champions that doesn't allow him to potentially carry a game. And that's how Koma was using him more often when they were on Vici Gaming. So hopefully the coaching staff for DRX doesn't waste this talented player. And then last but not least, we'll talk about Beryl. Did we talk about Piosik? Not last but not least. We'll talk about Beryl, but then I want to go back to Piosik. So for Beryl, I think that Beryl was the better player out of the Dom1 bot lane. I think that Ghost had a lot of limitations as an AD carry. I'm not saying that Ghost is a bad AD carry. I probably should have put the... And after how this season went, I should have just said that Ghost was bad, and I would have looked like a genius. Disclaimer part of this video in there, but I'm not going to. It just means that when I say stuff like that, it means that I think that they get too much credit when their team wins, and not enough of the blame when their team loses. I think that Ghost actually went through some like struggles last year, potentially mentally, because I know that the roster had a lot of turnover, and they were trying different combinations with bringing Malrong in. So I think that it's kind of unfortunate if Ghost was going through some bad stuff, but at the end of the day, this is professional League of Legends, and I'm just talking about him as a professional player. So I think that Barrel's champion pool should be really good. When Damwon was at their scariest, in my mind, they were taking advantage of Barrel's diverse champion pool, playing things. And obviously his champion pool played a huge role in the finals. Like, not every professional support is comfortable playing things like the Heimerdinger or Bard. So things with a Senna 80 carry. Senna's not meant to carry the game. It's meant to be on a team that has other players who are meant to carry the game, including Barrels like Pantheon and stuff like that. So those are the types of champions I love watching. I like when supports have very wide champion pools and can pick a bunch of different types of champions, because that means you could always potentially save your counter pick for your support. And I like that kind of League of Legends. And then, just touching on Piosik before we move on to the last team. Piosik performed very well at Worlds in 2020. I know that they had Chovy, I know that they had Deft, but that in that season, it was another spot where the drafts often didn't play around Chovy, and there are one of two ways to look at it. You can either say, wow, that was very stupid of the coaching staff. If they just played more around Chovy and drafted more around Chovy, they would have had easier game scripts that they had to follow, and Chovy would have been stronger in the mid-late game, and he would have been able to carry more games. Or you can look at it as, if they're willing to put Chovy on some non-carry champions, that means that they have confidence in Piosik being able to carry some of these matches. And I'm pretty sure there was like a Nidalee performance at Worlds where he had like 13 or 14 kills and just went completely insane. And that's ultimately the type of player that I think Piosik is. That's his ceiling, is being potentially one of the best junglers in the world. We haven't seen it consistently from him, but I think if DRX is able to perform at a high level this year, Piosik will look like one of the best junglers in the world. So that's just a talent evaluation thing. So before, I guess I'll get this out of the way too. So before the final started, T1 was expected to win the match about 80% of the time. If you're listening to this part of the video, you let me know in the comments section. What do you think, after watching the finals, do you think that the odds should have been, or what do you think it felt more like during the match? Like, there were some people commenting they thought it was like 60-40 or 65-35. Did that look like a 65-35 match that was T1 favored? In my mind, it definitely didn't. It was a very close match, and I think that most of the time, if they play out that match, it will be a close match. So again, this kind of just speaks to the point that I was trying to make, which is that I believed in DRX before the season started because of my talent evaluations of these different players. Just because a player isn't playing well at like one point in time doesn't mean that they'll never play well again. And that's an important thing to remember. You should always try to separate out, what do I think about this player, as opposed to what do I think about this team. Because it would have been very easy to say, like, oh, well, Ghost is a good AD carry. He was on Damwon. They won a world championship. But in reality, Ghost, was never really the main focal point of that team, and we shouldn't have been attributing so much, we shouldn't have given him as much credit as some people did. In reality, it was always like the Showmaker Canyon show with a lot of good barrel performances, obviously Nuggery and everything. So, actually, was Nuggery on that? But that's besides the point. All right, then let's go to the other video I want to take a look at, which is this is about the players and teams at Worlds that I was the most interested in. At this point in the video, I was talking about players that I liked more than other people, and yeah, let's just listen. Some players that I wanted to talk about that are kind of like more off the beaten path than what the players that Cadril talked about on his channel are players like Piosik. Piosik is one of the best junglers in the world. I don't think that he's as good as Kanavi or Canyon, but Piosik is the best player on DRX. They brought in Juhan, I think, because Piosik may need to have like military service next year. I don't like the way that DRX drafts. I don't like how they use Juhan as a sub, and like splits time with Piosik. But I think talent wise, Piosik is one of the best in the world. We saw that when they were at Worlds last time. Zika is one of the best mid laners in the world. A lot of people probably aren't talking about him because they're not as familiar with Zika. Zika isn't a quote-unquote household name yet, but I think that if DRX is able to make a run during this tournament, these are the two players that are going to kind of jump up to the top of people's lists going into next year. So again, this was, over a month ago. This was before Worlds really was fully underway. Some people might say, well, based off of the finals performance, maybe Kingen deserves more credit. Maybe Kingen should be a player that we, think is a household name or should become a household name as well. I'm not 100% convinced about that. I think that Kingen is good enough to be on a championship winning team, but he's not a player that I would build around. I would build around Piosik. I would build around Zika. I think that Kingen is a beneficiary of having players like Piosik and Zika on his team because it allows the drafts to go in their favor. Like if Kingen was thought of as the best player on this team, there's no way they would have given him Aatrox as many times as they did. So let's go through the drafts from each of these games, and then during Game 5, I want to watch the deciding play and just talk about that. So I have my notes. So in the Game 1 draft, I said T1 was going to pick blue side. They picked blue side, not very surprising. It's pretty common. During my preview video for this match, I did mention Yone was going to be an impactful champion, and I think it was smart of T1 to use it in Game 1. They blind picked Varus. In this match, Varus won the first 4 games and then lost in Game 5. This team comp... actually, never mind. That's for Game 5. Then we had DRX going Aatrox Viego. I think that was pretty easy to see. Most people who pay attention kind of knew that was the direction the draft would most likely go. Kingen on Aatrox is great. T1 felt like they were probably baiting Kingen into the Aatrox pick, which is fine. And then Piosik on Viego, common but good. Then we had the Yone counter into Aatrox. The fact that they did it in Game 1 and then didn't try to manipulate the draft in Game 2 to get Yone again, I think was a big mistake. Then we had Keria on Renata Glass blind, which is fine. Then we had Silas blind. So the 1, 2, 3, yeah. So then the Silas being blind, you're giving Zika one of his good champions. I think that there was a possibility T1 was punished even harder in Game 1. If the Yone didn't work in Game 1, T1 would have been pretty screwed. But they gave over the Silas because T1 was fine with the response picks because they're not counter picks. Azir and Victor are not counters to Silas. They're just response picks that do well in some ways in the matchup and give T1 some winning chances, but not an overwhelming advantage in the mid lane. One thing to take note of is that DRX specifically didn't want to give Faker Rise as a response pick to the Silas. So that's one thing that T1 should have been paying attention to during the draft. Then we had Heimer on R4 going into Renata. I'm not really... I haven't seen enough Heimerdinger to understand when it's very good and when it's very bad. But they seem convinced that it's very good. I don't have much more on that. The Lee response versus Viego is fine, but I think most people would probably prefer to be on the Viego side of that. The Azir response into Silas is fine. And then DRX, the Sivir is kind of a big question mark in my mind because it told me a few things. First of all, it told me that, Aphelios and Jinx, their read is that you can't play it into the Varus. So Varus with Renata, I'm pretty sure that in previous metas we did have the Jinx and Aphelios going up against the Varus, even if it was counterpicking themselves, because it's really on the Varus to win the early game, and then you're eventually going to outscale them. So I don't know. That's really just more of a question. So then in this game, T1, I think, won the draft. They had a lot of engage options. DRX didn't have much disengage or ability to avoid engage. There were a couple moments during game 1 where T1 had really good flanking opportunities against DRX, and we saw this, I think we saw this in some other Yone matches where the Yone ultimate is just so impactful. Azir ultimate is so impactful. Renata's ultimate is so impactful. Varus' ultimate can be very impactful. They're all AoE abilities that, you know, control large pieces of the map, and it's difficult for a low range team like DRX to deal with that. So in the early game, Pyosik failed Smite at 7-minute mark, which gave T1 the additional ability to accelerate the game and play for Dragon Soul. If DRX was able to get that first dragon, I think that it would have made it much easier for them to play out the game, but it was a big failure. After the failed dragon, I think that DRX should have sent bot lane to the Rift, but instead they had potentially a split call where they lost Rift and they gave up kills. They were down 2,000 at 17 minutes, and the third dragon, the 19-minute mark, I think demonstrates the strength of T1's team comp, and they played it really well. With a 4K gold lead at the 19-minute mark, the game should be over. And honestly, when you're down 2K at 17 minutes, you should probably win that game, or when you're winning by 2,000 at the 17-minute mark, with the dragon advantage. You should be winning that game most of the time, especially when you have a draft advantage as well. Very tough for DRX to play from that position. So, do I think that the draft made it impossible for DRX to win? No, but it did make it very difficult. And it seems like they learned a lot. Maybe learned a lot isn't the right way, but they had much better engage options in the future games. So in game 2, I think that T1 made a huge mistake by not doubling down on Yone. Yone was not banned by DRX. I think this is a spot where you say, you can pick Varus blind. We're gonna pick Yone. Then you're gonna take potentially Aatrox. I think that I don't know what T1 was afraid of. Like, is Camille versus Yone really Yone, or really Camille favored? Is Aurelia or Fiora? Like, what champion were they afraid of? Why didn't they just double down on the Yone? I think they should have. The Ashe and Aatrox response, T1 probably feels like they're taking a champion away from Kingen, and then also getting a very strong AD carry and taking it away from the Ashe Heimerdinger bot lane that DRX probably wants to run. Then you get a Camille response to the Aatrox, which ended up being very impactful. They blind picked Heimer to keep it away from T1 for the Ashe Heimer combination. Then we get a Lux response, which this is part of the reason why I love Keria. He has so many champions that he's willing to play, and to a very high level. Then we had Graves blind pick, which is a very good pick. The Viego response was expected. Silas blind pick, that's just all the time. You're going to get that almost all the time, and T1 was okay giving away the Silas for the lane advantage because they felt like Victor has a slight advantage in the early game. But I'm really not a Victor fan at all. I think it's a pretty bad champion. It's a win more champion. Like, when you're winning, it looks amazing. When you're losing, it looks horrible. And if the game is really close, you have to make a play. Faker almost made a play with Victor during this match. I think he had like a 3-man ultimate that was very, damage heavy in that fight, but didn't create a big enough advantage to win the fight. So T1 had a commanding lead at 11 minutes, and in general, I think a 2,000 gold lead should be converted. DRX equalized because of a Rift play that they took into a mid siege that created a positional advantage for them in the mid lane. Like, there should be a big priority on having mid prio, especially when you can have your mid tower and the enemy doesn't have theirs. The 33-minute mark, dragon and positional advantage forces T1 to make an aggressive decision. They overextended for that dragon. They got aced and they lost Baron. So then it didn't, in this game, it didn't end up being the difference because we did ultimately get to a 44-minute Dragon Soul. T1 made an aggressive Baron call 4v4. DRX wins the fight. They make a great play in the mid lane. They barely ended the game before the respawns. And it was just tremendous awareness on behalf of DRX, because it was an opportunity to win the game that you should never miss. Well, not never miss. It's just you need to take advantage of those if you want to be world champions. It demonstrates a killer instinct that not every team has. Would love to hear the team comps to know who called the end of the game or to end the game. Really, that was really a great moment. You should definitely check that out if you didn't watch finals. But if you didn't watch finals, why are you watching this video? Game 3 draft, Varus blind picked again. Kalista Renata response. Personally, I don't like Kalista. I think that when you're in a spot against a team as good as T1, you know, how often is the Kalista really going to pay off? Azir blind from T1 is basically saying, we know you're going to take the Sylas. We're fine taking Azir into it. It does give them some pretty good engage. Then they also picked Karma, which was kind of weird. And I think this kind of baited T1 into making a bad decision in the future game. Then we had the Sylas response. Viego blind pick, anticipating the Graves. So DRX is making it clear they prefer the Viego side. Then we had Gragas, which I think is just a bad pick. And then Ornn was a bad pick, especially with his team composition, because it's difficult to make an impact in team fights outside of your ultimate when you're losing. Like, the low range is a big problem for Ornn. Like, if the other team is brain dead and is standing against a wall or something, like, yeah, that could be really good. But, you know, you shouldn't expect T1 to play that poorly. And then the combination of, like, Renata ultimate with Ornn ultimate, you know, I'm sure that's very good as well. But, you know, I just don't understand the Ornn pick. So at the 24-minute mark, DRX tries to make a Baron play. Graves stole it, but it wasn't like a steal like we saw with Varus later on, or like, you can blame Pyosik a little bit, but it was a stressful moment in the game, and it is a tough call to make. But you do want your jungler winning those smite fights. And I think that they kind of played it out wrong. They were all kind of huddled in the back of the pit, but, you know, whatever. T1 makes a 5,000 gold Baron play. And then, you know, my real question is, if you're going to get outscaled in this match, why pick Ornn? And the only real explanation would be if you manage to win the early game, that it gives you some additional time to close out the game before the other team is overwhelming. But, you know, after the second Baron, you know, it's definitely a loss. I think that the only chance they had at winning that fight specifically was if they moved forward and tried to engage instead of trying to finish off the Baron and jumping out of the pit. You know, if they get the Baron and win that fight, they probably win the game. But that's kind of whatever. So at that point, T1's up 2-1. Game 4, we get Varus blind picked again. Then you had Kalista with Sejuani. I think that putting Owner onto Sejuani is a big mistake. Just not the kind of champion that I want one of my players who needs to be a playmaker on. Not really much more to say about that. If you disagree with that, then we just see the game differently. The Renata Azir is an interesting pivot. I think it was smart for DRX to say, okay, well, you guys think that Azir is so strong. We'll take the Azir side of this matchup. What are you going to do about it? Then we get the Soraka response, which was a little bit surprising, especially for Keria, because now I feel like you've taken Owner, who's a potential playmaker and put him onto Sedge, which is limited playmaking. And then you also have Keria, another playmaker, on something like Soraka, which I don't love. Faker takes the Akali counter, which Faker is one of the players who you trust the most to take this counter pick and kind of turn it into a win. We saw that he can take over a game, and Akali's can take over this game in this matchup. We saw it in earlier rounds at World. Faker has done very well historically against Azir with the Akali, but it is very volatile. Then the giving away the Aatrox was, you know, kind of surprising from T1. Like, Kingan's obviously very good at it. So, like, why are you giving it away? I just don't get it. The Maokai was a little bit surprising. In general, I don't want Pyosik on tank junglers, but the additional engage and lockdown against Akali and Kalista made a lot of sense. I think that it was a mistake for T1 to pick the Akali in R4, because if you picked, if you're T1, you basically know that DRX is going to pick Aatrox, so you should be anticipating that. Pick your counter for the Aatrox. I think if they did that and they picked Fiora on R4, like, let me see. R4 Aatrox probably would have made DRX not okay. So I was saying I think that if T1 picked the Aatrox instead of giving it away, then it forces DRX to have a counter prepared for the Aatrox, which maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like, if you don't want to play against a Camille again, then fine. But you could have also banned out the Camille, but they decided not to. And then I think that if they did that, it would have been an easier spot to pick the Akali against Azir, but they kind of lost the element of surprise with the Akali, which gave DRX the opportunity to pick Maokai. And that ended up, being a big, it ended up having a big impact. So the top dive against the Fiora gave Aatrox a lead. So we had DRX pick Aatrox, Fiora was the response pick, and then Aatrox still won that matchup because of gank pressure. So yeah, I this is another spot where, like, why isn't Yone being picked in the first half of this draft? Like, it's a potential flex too. I just don't get why T1 didn't have a higher priority on it, especially after it was successful in game 1. And then DRX won this game at the second Rift fight. It was one of the more lopsided games in this match. And then let's talk about the game 5 draft and then look at that clip. So game 5 draft, and this was really kind of surprising. Some people want to blame just the draft, and I think the draft had a lot to do with it, but it's easy to say draft was bad. Like, why was the draft potentially bad? I think that the Karma blind pick was really weird. DRX going Azir Caitlyn. Caitlyn was banned red side every game, and then T1 didn't first pick it. So why were they banning it, and what combo were they afraid of? I just don't really get that. Then we had Victor, a trap pick. So, like, why do you want to play Victor against the Azir? Like, I understand that both champions have ways to win and be impactful in that matchup, and we see it all the time. But I just hate Victor. I just hate him. Victor had a 30% win rate at Worlds. A lot of that has to do with the teams that were playing it, but even Faker, who had a 100% win rate on Victor going into this match, ended up losing 2 games, going 50%. There had to be a better pick than Victor. Like, there had to be something else that they could have utilized. And maybe this was just good drafting by DRX. Maybe T1 thought, game 5 they're going to take the Sylas, we'll have the Azir again, it'll be fine. But they ended up putting themselves into a spot where DRX takes the Azir and T1 banned out the Akali for some reason. So, just kind of bizarre. I think that they were also afraid of Zika taking the Akali in game 5. So, just kind of surprising. Then we had a Varus pick. So my question is, if you don't care about Varus versus Caitlyn, then why would you pick Karma first? If Caitlyn and Karma versus Varus was the combo they were searching for, like, would it win? Would Varus Karma beat Caitlyn? Just kind of confusing. You need a clear answer from T1 to that type of question if you want to see why they drafted this way. Then the Aatrox blind pick. I think it was a huge mistake to give Kingen the Aatrox again, especially if their plan was to counter it with Gwen, because that's not a winning matchup for Gwen. It's like a soft counter. Like, there are some good things about it. Like, Gwen is going to scale harder, but you need to get to that point in the game. Like, why sacrifice the early and mid game? Then we had the Bard response pick against the Karma, which was probably surprising to T1 as well as everyone else. The Viego brought some engage, but not enough to reliably start fights, especially when losing. And that's a big thing that teams probably don't draft enough around. Like, there are pretty clear spots in a game that you can sort of project. Like, if you're losing by over 2,000 gold at the 20-minute mark, then you're probably going to lose the game. If you're winning by 2,000, then you're probably going to win the game. So what happens between those numbers? Like, how does my team composition function against the enemy's team composition within 2,000 gold? Because like those other games mean that something bad happened in the early game, that you like made a bad decision or something like that. So then, you know, the real question is, why Gwen? I don't know. Maybe I don't really know what champions first of all, I don't know why they didn't have better answers for the Aatrox. And you know, Yone, which is a good answer against the Aatrox, why wasn't higher priority placed on it in the drafts? And then Hecarim is okay, but not great against Varus and Victor. I wonder why not Maokai, afraid of getting steamrolled early by Viego. And I know that in this game, I think the Viego does take advantage of Hecarim a little bit in the early game, or at least the possibility was there. But I think that was probably their thinking. So the rest of my notes are: the draft advantage allowed DRX to contest even when behind. The 20-minute TP flank when T1 sieges mid should have been the game-winning play. Varus had a very lucky miracle steal. Piosik didn't even smite. Tough to say whether or not DRX should have anticipated Varus, you know, TPing into mid lane and then trying to get the steal. Like, it was a low percentage play, but it worked out for them. DRX consistently looked for flanks from when they were behind, which means that there was good shot calling, good coaching, and enough engage from the draft. If you don't draft enough engage in the draft, then you're not going to be able to, you know, take these risky flanking positions and stuff like that. Which is something that teams like T1, DRX, and some other very good teams have, you know, this propensity to draft more of a finesse game, where it's like, okay, well, we think that around like a decisive dragon or baron fight, we will have a slight lead. We'll be able to get there first, and then as the enemy team walks into us, we'll be able to deal with them. But you know, it's a really risky way to play the game. The thing that really, I was watching this game, and when DRX took mid at the 32-minute mark, I thought that was really a sign that the game was about to shift, because it released a lot of pressure that they were experiencing in the mid lane, and then they had to trade Soul for Baron, which I think is a fine trade. And then the reason why it's a good trade is because T1 can't feel comfortable sieging mid because of the flank, which happened earlier in the game. The hard engage from Hecarim, Aatrox, Azir, and the Bard ultimates all kind of played into like why they were probably afraid to make that kind of play. So let's take a look at the game-winning fight, and we're gonna look at it pretty slow. Actually, let me get this pen thing out. There it is. All right. So at this point in the game, T1 had a 3,500 gold lead, but DRX had Dragon Soul. Dragon Soul is probably worth about 5,000 gold in defensive stats. And against a champion like Poke Varus, that's pretty impactful. This is Poke Varus. So he had a bunch of inefficient items where they're good in specific game states, but they're not consistently good. In the first 4 games, I think 3 out of the 4 games, it was on hit Varus. There was only one other time where Varus was built as Poke Varus, which is just something to keep in mind. They probably felt like they had enough damage in this team composition, but a lot of it was magic damage, so I'm surprised they didn't just go for the on hit again. That probably would have given them more chances to convert this lead. So we have Azir and Aatrox up here. We have the rest of DRX closer to the blue buff, T1 is holding their position pretty well. This should give them the advantage getting onto the Elder Soul first. Then Gwen was in the jungle, walking towards the rest of her team. And this was a pretty interesting start to this exchange. You see DRX looking to kind of advance their position, which is not a simple thing to do. And this is what I wanted to kind of talk about first. Like this is a very smart thing that Beryl tries to do. It didn't end up really working out for him, but the idea is if you take a look at this, see they have vision on Faker, Keria, and Varus, and Beryl knows that by hitting the ward 2 times, it's pretty common and expected for the next animation Bard does is to be another auto attack onto that ward. So when that happens, instead of auto attacking, which Faker anticipated and threw his Q, Beryl threw his ultimate instead onto what he was trying to do was throw it onto Faker and Varus at the same time. So that forced the flash from Gumayusi, right? So that's pretty big. Now Beryl's chunked out, and this was, lucky's not the right word, but it was fortuitous how it kind of plays out. So they're trying to move in towards Elder again because they don't want T1 to be able to take it for free. And now Kingen starts looking for a flank. So if you see, Kingen went down here, and he's going to make his way down into the enemy jungle, which is obviously, a smart idea if there's no vision from T1 in the jungle. Like, he could have theoretically been caught, but there wasn't any vision there, luckily for him. So play this out more. And, they know that Beryl and Piosik are trying to make their way in. They probably assume that Kingan's over there as well. They see Azir in the mid lane. They're not 100% sure where Caitlyn is, but, that's fine. And this is what happens in games sometimes. So Viego is going in onto the Bard, who has about half health, right? So that's kind of sketchy. They get the stun off and the silence, but Bard somehow was able to get the portal off, like the lag's not the right word. The buffer time allowed him to get that off, so that portal lets him escape with his life. He has barely any health left. Piosik and Deft get out, so he lived with barely any health. If he doesn't survive that, they are not able to make the follow-up play. So T1 has been in this position for a long time. During that time, the red buff spawned. Kingen was able to take it, which is somewhat risky because it increases the chance that T1 could see where he was. They start Dragon, and at this point, T1 is very concerned because they don't know where Aatrox is. They see the TP coming in. They are probably assuming it's the Azir, which it was. And now, see this, like Zeus was told, okay, we need you to find Aatrox. So he jumps out of the pit and finds the Aatrox. The dragon is at 7k. They're probably not trying to finish that off right away. So now T1 starts to disengage a little bit and respond to the Aatrox. Aatrox is always going to escape there. He has his flash. He has his dash. So now, it's at 6,500. And these are coin flips. These are, tough times to make decisions. So they're looking for the dragon damage, just trying to make sure that DRX is the one eating it. And now I think this is the moment when they kind of decided that they were going to go for a base race. So dragon is too low. Owner is going to potentially be able to get the steal. And they're channeling. Zeus starts to channel TP, and Faker is going to go in as well. So the idea is that they are both going to go into the base. DRX is going to win Dragon Soul, and then T1 needs to stop the backs for not even that long, just for 10 seconds. If they could stop the backs for 10 seconds, they would have been able to win this game. However, they don't have a lot of ways to interrupt teleports. So Victor is one of the champions that could have stopped the teleport. I think that Varus ultimate could theoretically, if it timed at the right time. if it was activated at the right time. And then the Viego could theoretically as well, but he was basically dead. So he gets thrown into GA before he can even get a smite off. Or he got a smite off, but he goes into the GA. DRX wins the Elder, and now it's T1's it's Keria, Gumayusi, and a reviving owner's job to stop as many backs as they can, but they really can't. So right on spawn, owner is dead. 2 of the members from T1 die almost instantly. Luckily, Kingen had his teleport up, which that could have been another thing that happened during this fight, is that they may have assumed that Zika and Kingen were both teleporting to the same ward. So the fact that he had teleport up was huge. That might have been game ending if he didn't. And then, Kingen doesn't panic. He plays it out pretty well. That was very interesting. Like, he flashed over, I think, primarily to try to get that knock up onto Faker, but then he also gave himself additional room to throw out the tether. And that's basically it. That's the game. And, it was a great match. This was also very interesting. I think if he doesn't Zanya's at the right time, then he probably would have died as well. But once the 4 members are dead from T1, the game is going to end, almost every time, unless DRX makes some kind of huge mistake. And that's what I love about League of Legends. Like, it was such a close match, and if T1 won this match, they would have been given a lot of credit, and probably more credit than DRX has received for this win. It was kind of heartbreaking to watch Keria afterwards. I know that a lot of these players put a ton of pressure on themselves, and Keria, I'm sure, thinks that he's one of the best supports, if not one of the best players in the world, and I agree. I think that he is one of the best players in the world. Very happy to see that DRX won. Obviously, I like making money. I like being right. But even in this scenario, right, if DRX did not win this game, would you have thought that I was right or wrong about how confident I was that DRX would be competitive in the finals? Like, those are the kinds of things that you need to be honest with yourself about, because otherwise you're not going to be able to project stuff well into the future. Like, I'm not always going to think of a good team that's a good dark horse to win a tournament. But when you get odds like plus 2,500, plus 4,000, you don't need to be right every time. You need to be right like once every 5 years for it to pay off. And it paid off. So I'm very happy with how Worlds went. I was very happy with how much engagement, how many views, how many comments I got on my last video. I hope that you guys stick around and check out some of my other content for next year. We're going into the off season, so there won't be much there, but for the LCS, LEC, LPL, LCK, I will have content like this before the season starts, during the season, and everything like that. So that's basically all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Go DRX. And I'll talk to you later.